Oh, metatextual. Oh, intersectionality. Diversity! Ah!
I know my moves like my ABC.
I've been looking into the aftermath of DiGRA 2015. Gamergate largely left the hashtag alone until after it was over, surprisingly, but this has lent it a more reasoned tone of disapproval and criticism, which I tend to prefer. There are deep, deep problems with DiGRA, and DiGRA 2015 just underlined this all over again. The program had very little to do with the actual analysis of games, or their audience, or their improvement, and instead was a grab bag of SoCal-esque buzzwords and shoehorned agendas. Gaming desperately needs a genuinely academic and scientific eye to genuinely help understand and improve this new medium. It doesn't need ideologues spouting nonsense which can be sniffed out in a near instant by anyone who actually participates in gaming culture or game design. I've tried, Hitchens knows I've tried, to engage in fruitful discussion with some of these alleged academics, but they tend to be as obdurate and unwilling to discuss or debate as the most thick-headed social justice warrior. Often they're one and the same. Is there room for academic and scientific investigation into games? Abso-fucking-lutely. Without the participation of makers and audience? Absolutely not. Pontificating from a distance about what you perceive to be the product's messages is only 1/3 of what's going on. You have the message being transmitted, you have the medium through which it passes, and you have the message being received. Fixating on the reception end and using willful bias in the form of critical theory, feminist lenses, racial lenses, etc., is too utterly subjective and incomplete to be useful. Death of the author doesn't give you a complete picture. Jargon isn't useful either. Many of the talks at DiGRA 2015 were stupid, full of impenetrable jargon, or both. For example, there's a talk on costume agency in German LARP. A costume is a series of objects. How the fuck, unless you're really committing to a Borderlands cosplay and strap a midget to yourself, can a costume have agency? Or take this one, exploring transtextuality in competitive games and esports. What? Transtextuality? That's textuality, not sexuality. What the hell's that? Well, it's relationships between text, quotations, plagiarism, allusion, titles, headings, footnotes, genre, commentary, sequels, any which way in which text relates to any other text. This might well have places in some games, Easter eggs, nods to one thing or another, etc., or textual games. But in competitive games and esports, beyond the game itself, once you cut through the jargon, it still seems like pointless bullshit. I've been quite keen to do videos addressing conference talks and panels, but there's very little to work with here. DiGRA's panels are desperately uninteresting, impenetrably obtuse, and, for the most part, seem to have very little applicability to game design or participation at all. Toril Mortensen has tried to address some of these criticisms of DiGRA, but unfortunately decided not to actually address them, instead overinflating the idea that Gamergate's view of DiGRA is a conspiracy theory. There's actually a lot to be concerned about in the ideological nature of much of its membership and presentations. The DARPA stuff sets off the conspiracy nuts, but they don't really represent Gamergate as a whole. We want conversations, Toril, but you're not having them. You call yourselves critics, but you're not. You're ideological gatekeepers, fixated on pointless minutiae. We love genuine academics with real scientific rigour, and we'd love them to be looking into games. Instead, we have people with axes to grind who are openly hostile to the necessary process that makes science meaningful. Gamers aren't anti-academia. Gamers fucking love science, which is why they took to the defence of Dr. Taylor, two-fisted man of science, and continue to support the gorgeous and talented Ellie Prizeman who made the shirt that he wore. Lots of gamers love science, peer-reviewed, experimentally confirmed science, not wild speculation and anecdote presented as fact. There's the difference, there's the conflict. Our expectations of academia are those of science, and they're higher than what you present. Why would we go to you with your apparent disdain and lack of understanding of games or game and internet culture, as opposed to someone like Mark Kern or Brad Wardell, or relying on my own 15 years of experience? Why would we go to you to understand how to make games work? What value are you bringing to the table? What does this navel-gazing circle jerk have to offer me as a designer or a consumer? This wouldn't be so problematic if activist pseudo-journalists weren't looking to activist pseudo-academics in order to provide activist pseudo-legitimacy for their activist pseudo-prejudices. The SPJ was delighted people were actually interested in journalistic ethics. Maybe you should be delighted that the stuff you're doing is getting attention as well, and should value the criticism in the way you expect others to. We're not going to get what we need from DiGRA, so maybe we need to look elsewhere or found our own groups of more pragmatic and objective thinkers to do the work that you can't. I have no idea what that would look like, but perhaps something sprouting from League for Gamers would do the job. That would be another positive new outlet that could come from Gamergate, along with better news sites, better aggregation, and watchdogs over games journalists. Maybe we could get some positive academia out of it as well. Still, all this considered, there's a couple of talks from that whole event that might prove genuinely useful for discussion, and which I'll try to do videos on later. Those are Who Needs Enemies? Architecture as Sole or Dominant Agent in Game Design, Games as a Genre of Historical Discourse, the Past on Fast Forward, Selective Realism, Suffering, Violence and War in First and Third Person Shooters, and Role-Playing and Rituals for Heritage-Oriented Games. Well, those piqued my interest and weren't buried beneath impenetrable jargon. But so maybe I'll do something with those later. Anyway, what do you think? Do we need any academia? Do we need better academia? Do we need more pragmatic and objective design? Do we need people telling us what's worked in their games, what might work in our games? Do we need a body of useful advice and academic investigation into games at all in the first place? Do let me know below. Peace.